Greetings, everyone, and welcome to East Meets West at the Vice. Today, the 20th of March, Eric Austin is going to do Says He's Cripple, and I'm Al Beatty, and I'll be doing the KX Emerger. If you've never heard of it before, that's because you've probably never seen it before. Anyway, I'm Al Beatty from Boise, Idaho, and my dear friend Eric Austin from back east. I don't know where he's claiming as his hometown is now, but he's joining me as well from his new home.
Yeah, I'm down in Tampa, Florida now. It used to be Delaware, Ohio, but moved to Florida.
And you're in the southeast area. So you've been telling us before we got started a little bit about this fly pattern that you're going to be working on, and I would like it a lot if you would just go ahead and continue, and I'll just kind of back away and let you have the spotlight.
Yeah, we'll do. The fly I'm going to tie today is a pattern that was introduced to our group by Seiji Sato from Japan. Seiji Sato is a master fly tyer, a fly fisherman, and an incredible photographer. He has made his living fly fishing his entire life. He's in his mid 60s and is the most incredible fly fisherman I've ever seen. And he designed these patterns. I think they're original with him. I don't know that for a fact. Designed these for Henry's Fork and for the slow moving side channels on the Missouri, which is where we like to fish, flat water. It's very much a flat water fly. And let me show you just a few cripples I've done in the past. This is the original Quigley cripple. This is used in the West, of course. Quigley designed. He didn't design this. It was the apocryphal story is that one of his humpies came apart on the Fall River out west, and the deer hair was extending over the eye. He fished the fly anyway and started having tremendous success. So we refined the whole idea, and this is a fly that is fished everywhere and very popular in the East as well as the West. This, of course, is the Last Chance Cripple, and this was our go-to fly on the Henry's Fork and on the Missouri for quite a while. I tied one of the first shows I tied at was in the Catskills for the Theodore Gordon Fly Fishers, and of course I knew there were going to be some great Catskill tires there, so I decided I wasn't going to tie Catskill flies, and I tied this fly and demoed this fly one of the 2 days. It was a 2-day show, and the other day I did a classic Atlantic salmon fly. But this one I handed to a gentleman who had sat patiently and watched me tie it, and he took it out that night and came back all excited the next day. He'd caught a fish with it in the Catskills. This is Seiji's cripple. Super sparse and a very fine body. Finer, I'm going to tie it even finer than this today. This isn't my best example of this fly. And let's get started with it. We call it Seiji's cripple. We don't know if Seiji invented it or not. There's a language barrier. None of us spoke Japanese, not even Dean Umamoto, our Japanese American part of our group. But let's get going here. But I was able to figure this fly out pretty readily. The hook is interesting. It's a fulling mill 50/50, and I'm tying this in a 16. And I left just a little bit of space in front of the eye. And now I'm going to go back to where I started the thread, because this wing, the first thing that goes on is the wing, and on this one, and it's pretty far forward. It's also a pretty tall wing the way Seiji does it, and that's good because this Polish CDC is not highly visible. It's very wispy. It's perfect for this fly because this fly is so sparse everywhere. We'll hold the two wings, the two pieces of Polish CDC back to back here. And like I said, we want a tall wing on this. I mean, I'm going to measure this out to about hook length. And I think that's about right. And I want to stagger cut this, but very short because I want as fine a body as I can get. Now, right now, I'm going to tie. Normally, I would wait on on before tying in the ribbing, but on this fly, because I want a very fine body, I found that if I tie the ribbing in now up here at the front, I can save myself one pass with the thread. And as I go back, I want to work this. Let me flatten this thread just a little bit more. I want to work this ribbing over to the far side of the hook. Normally, I tie in all my ribbing on the far side. If you do that, it'll start cleanly when you wind it. And at this point, I'm going to tie in the shuck, and Seiji does a very fine shuck, and it's all it's twisted up. I'll tell you who else does a fine shuck like this is Wayne Llewellyn. And in order to maintain the twist, I've used some of Al's dubbing wax. Just put a little bit on throughout this, and then twisted it up, and that keeps it together. Again, just like the wing, pretty long tail on this, or shuck tail. And on Seiji's flies, it naturally curves up. And if this is a little too long, and this actually might be a little too long, I'm gonna trim it back. You can just cut it right there. That's only about a half dozen strands of Zelon. Let me get this bound down here. And I've got a little cliff on the body here. I'm gonna smooth that out. Don't want to overdo it, but we take this almost all the way to the wing, because we're only going to put 2 turns of hackle on this thing later. Now it's very difficult to see this. This is crystal flash. on camera. It's pretty easy for me to see it here, but for some reason, it doesn't show up well on my monitor. You want 4 or 5 turns of ribbing. It's not critical. Spaced as evenly as you can get them. I've got 4 on this. I'm trapping it twice, once in front, once behind, once in front, once behind. And the whole idea of that trapping is to try to keep the thread turns to a minimum. By the way, let me show you something. Let's see if this will work. I don't know if this will work or not. See how much better the ribbing shows up with the light off versus the light on? I learned that trick from tying Silver Doctors. Silver Doctor has a silver flat tinsel body, and then it has a rib of, again, silver oval tinsel. And it's almost impossible to see how the spacing is going unless you turn off the light. If you turn off the light, you can see what you're doing. So keep that in mind, wrapping tinsel. Let's see. We can tie in our hackle now. We're going to post up this wing, take a couple turns in front. Didn't leave myself much space. Okay. Right there is 1 full turn of hackle. And right there is the second. Hold the hackle up. Dick Shaw's going to like this, although he might not. And we're going to trap the hackle with turns behind, turns in front, and turns behind. Just open the scissors up. And Dick reminded me of that trick in one of our previous conversations. I used to do that years and years ago, and I'd forgotten about it. You just push the open scissors through. And 3-turn whip finish in front, and we're done. And that's Sagey's Cripple.
That is gorgeous, Eric. And now I have to go to work a heck of a lot quicker than I thought I would because that went together so fast.
Well, I wanted to talk about Sagey just a little bit, so you still got some time. The guys I fish with, I fish with Bruce Copeland, who I've known since nursery school. We grew up in the Adirondacks fly fishing together. And Bruce moved to Bozeman a number of years ago and became a phenomenal fly fisherman while I was out in a band touring bars. But so Bruce, I have to admit, Bruce is a little better fly fisherman than I am. And he's got a good friend, Dean Umamoto, who's also a friend of mine now, that he knew in Maryland. I met Dean in Maryland when I went there. And Charlie, of course, Charlie Jordan here. And we have fished together for years. Now Tom Wilson has joined our group, and Tom had a place on Penns Creek which is another great fishery. It's Lake Henry's Fork in the east. It's multiple hatches. I love that place. Anyway, Bruce's nephew roomed with Seiji Sato in Japan. Bruce's nephew spoke fluent Japanese. He was killed in an avalanche a few years back, unfortunately, but he got to know Seiji really well. And Seiji came and fished with us 3 years ago, and we did Henry's Fork and the side channels of the Missouri, which is what we always do now, pretty much. We'll do spring creeks every once in a while. And Seiji, honestly, we were all expecting a lot, but he blew our minds. We thought we were pretty good dry fly fishermen, and we didn't have a clue what that was. It was really eye-opening. I'll just tell one quick story. I've told Al a couple already. I mean, just from the one trip, there were all these stories. One of which was John McDaniel is a guide at Henry's Fork who's been there. He's guided for 35 years. And he had a party, John McDaniel had a party out at Bonefish Flats, which is this flat water, the kind of water we love to fish. Very tough. And he had, and these guys, they weren't beginners. They were good fly fishermen that he had in his group that day. And they had done nothing all morning. Bruce and Seiji go out there, and within 20 minutes, Seiji had 4 fish, big fish. I mean, the guy, and John McDaniel, who's not impressed by pretty much anybody, went over to Bruce and said, "Bruce, who's that guy?" I mean, Seiji was just incredible. And this fly, I'm telling you, this thing is every bit as good as Seiji is. So I highly recommend this. I hope you'll tie some up if you fish flat water, east or west. Tom Wilson has taken this fly and fished it on Penn Creek and done great with it. Same fly, which is a PMD imitation, but it doesn't seem to matter. Any questions about this fly? Or
we do have a couple in the chat. 357 wants to know about the materials list, and Neil wants to know about the colors you use of the thread, shuck, and hackle.
There you go.
Okay,
Here's the
materials list. Yes.
Brown thread for the body. The crystal flash ribbing is green. And everything's brown. The hackle you can use. I have to be honest. It looked more like closer to a ginger or a dark ginger that Seiji used for this fly. But I tied a bunch of them with brown hackle that was it was whiting, and it was kind of half brown, and then the not so good side was ginger, which you'll see in a lot of whiting hackle, kind of two-tone. And I tied them for the guys, and they work great. So I don't think it's ultra. I don't think it's that important, to be honest, whether it's brown or ginger.
Can I say a couple of things?
Excellent.
Yes.
This is Neil. For sure, that is a great pattern. I was just talking to Chuck Ballard, who couldn't be with us today. We were at Project Healing Waters, and we were talking about flies that you start tying, and then all of a sudden you're into the art of it, and you just keep tying and tying and tying because of the art. And the Last Chance Cripple is definitely one of those for me, without a doubt. And I've tied them all the way. I've never tied them as big as 16. I've tied them 18 to 22s.
18s is
on the
size. For PMDs, I tie 18s, period.
Right. But you can tie a Beatty pattern for that. That'll work well. trying to think what else you could probably use. You could probably go dark with it for male tricos coming off just before dark on a river, but it's an all around pattern. And this I have found with anything CDC, for what it's worth, the slower I fish it, like almost stall it out, the more effective it is because you get the movement of the CDC and the air bubbles.
I couldn't agree more. The CDC has a magic. There's little doubt. At least now, it's not practical for a lot of rougher water. It's just not always practical. Last Chance Cripple. I mean, the hair up one. Let's see, where is it? That one. This is hair up's version of the Quigley, really.
Right.
What a great fly. I mean, and by the way, it works great for Beatys. It's a terrific pattern for Beatys tied
Right.
really small, you know.
Right. The other thing that works really well for a body is Polish quills. You can get neutral, you can get different colors. I tend to use that a lot when I get really small. I just think they're easier to put on, and I don't I don't think the fish care. I think the trigger is the wing and the hackle, and that's it.
Yeah.
I don't disagree.
You know a trick you can do if you want to tie this one really small. And I know you can't see this pointer I'm using, but if you want to tie the Last Chance in 20 or 22, if instead of using the biot side of the feather of a biot feather, use the other side, and it gives you this real fine, short body. And I hope that's a strand from the other side of the feather, the long side. Is that
Eric?
Yeah.
This is Lou. You nailed it with that fly, because when it was introduced to me, a guy opened his box and he showed it to me, and it was identical to what you tied. And the only thing I can see where I've done to tweak it for my own is, instead of just using regular dry fly hackle, I wrapped CDC hackle to get a little bit of. But yeah, it's a deadly fly, maybe because it's not been used much, but
I
it's
don't know.
gone under the radar for a long time, and it really works.
It's worked for us. That's all I can tell you.
Yeah.
It's
A
You
comment
can
from
also
Jay.
use it for a comparadon cripple. When you're fishing comparadons for female tricos coming off in the morning,
okay.
works great for that.
Comment from Jay Lee in the Netherlands. He says, I like the sparse hackle, as many tied the cripple with way too many hackle wraps. And I'll let you comment on that to Jay, if you would.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, that's, I don't know. You know me, Jay. I mean, we're sparse people.
Well, you know what? If you'd have known he was going to be on, you wouldn't have been using whiting hackle, first off.
Oh, no.
Big mistake. Big mistake.
Yeah. Well, Jay really gets sparse. He uses different kinds of hackle that has less barb density than the whiting. So
I can't believe
Jay's stuff is really sparse. And by the way, Jay's Catskill hackle. Jay ties a lot of Catskill style flies and ties them. He's a master as far as I'm concerned. I can't say enough about his flies, and it all comes down to the hackle, man. His hackle is something to behold. It's perfect.
Totally amazing. The time I worked at Whiting Farms, we would sit in the lunchroom, having lunch with Tom and brainstorming ways to increase the barb density, because that was, in our perception, quality hackle. Of course, we were tying for a whole bunch different crowd, but anyhow, it's interesting.
No, it still is. I mean, I have no problem with whiting, and Yeah, if you want to float the fly really, really well, I don't know that you can beat it. It's good hackle.
Are you ready to wind this up and move on to the next one?
Absolutely ready.
Okay. Well, then you're all stuck with me. And we may as well take a look at the roadmap fly, just like Eric did a few minutes ago. That's a couple of the cripples that we're going to be tying. And I got a 12 in the vise, and I got one more the size that I would fish. It's an 18. I fish a lot of these in sizes 14 through 20. Once in a while at 22, but mostly these are in the 14 and smaller. And when I say I fish this is a new fly that's never been fished, but I fish it. Well, what I wanted to explain to you is how some inspiration came into my life, and I made a couple of additions to a fly that I used when I was guiding in Montana on the spring creeks and all the same places that Eric talked about, the Henry's Fork, the backwaters of the Missouri. There are a lot of backwaters that folks don't know about on the Madison below the Bear Trap Canyon that is very spring creeky. In fact, there's a section around a part of the area the local guides call the outhouses, which is it's the only thing that's there. So that's the way you reference them. And there's some incredible spring creek type fishing in all the back channels in that part of the Madison as well. But anyway, taking a look at this fly, I'm calling it an emerger pattern. And I want to get into why I'm calling it an emerger, but I want to go to where I got my inspiration. Now, the fly started out as basically this with no rubber legs on it. Let me turn this so you can see the rubber legs I've got there. And with just a body wrap down into the shank of ways and a little tuft of Antron yarn sticking out for the shuck. What I've done on the shuck that I've never really liked about the shuck that I did on the original pattern is I've brought it together so that it is more body shaped, even though a shuck, as much as a shuck can be. The other thing, make sure I don't neglect to talk about sparkle and the shuck, but we'll get to that in a bit. For right now, though, let's take a look at the recipe and then we'll look at the inspiration. Recipe. We call it the KX Emerger. I'll talk about the K. The X, well, it's got Madam X legs on it. So I forgot to put that on the recipe. So my apologies to you all, but there's supposed to be some very fine rubber leg tied on Madam X style. I'm using a scud hook, thread, whatever color you feel like tying it with, because this is a design fly, not specifically for a specific insect. It can be in larger sizes as an emerger for larger mayflies, or down into the 20s for the little bitty guys, the blue-winged olives, et cetera, et cetera. The tail is really, call it a tail, a shuck, whatever. Anyway, it's Antron yarn and glue. And the reason I glued the end of it, I'll take a quick look here. The reason I glued the end of it is so that it would be more body shaped instead of a tuft of yarn sticking out the back that was square on the end. However, as fine as the one that Eric put on his, as fine as the one Eric put on his fly, there wouldn't be that kind of a problem. But anyway, back to the recipe. We're just using peacock, dubbing, or whatever you want it to be. The hackle is deer hair, or it can be wing, or it can be whatever you want it to be. That's why it's got a question mark. And the head can be deer hair with a question mark. And unfortunately, I left off rubber legs, and they're very fine, as you'll see when I get to that part of the game. Let's look at where the inspiration came from. Riverkeeper Flies, dear friend of mine in Oregon, John Careft, and another fellow in Oregon that we'll talk about, Dick Rohrbaugh. Those two people were inspirations that put the final touches on the pattern that I'm tying today. And if you want to, if you are interested in joining a really great twice a week blog, Riverkeeper Flies, there's the web address. John Karef sends out this blog. And if you want some incredible photography on what I call on the water bugs, that's what John does incredibly well. And you need to visit that website. But anyway, let's get back to the materials. And these are the materials that we're going to be using. I think they're pretty much self-explanatory. I'll start with scud hooks, size 12, however they be, whatever you want them to be. I've got here, you can't tell what that is, but that actually is UV glue, UV light, Antron wool, thread, peacock, hair, thread magic. Right now I'm working on irrigation systems for the house here as we get things ready for spring, and my fingers just go to heck when I'm digging around in the mud and all that kind of stuff, and it really makes it tough for tying flies. And of course my hair stacker, and so that before Jaylee even asked, it's not for sale. You know, I keep getting these questions on that. But anyway, let's get back over to the vise for a minute. One of the things that I discovered in a presentation by Dick Rohrbaugh that gave me the answer that I'd been looking for years, and I was never quite satisfied with the bug that I fished all the time in Montana in the Spring Creek environments. It was kind of a crippled emerger, whatever the heck you want to call it, was the shuck. Because that shuck would often just kind of spread out in the water, and it would be a big tuft of yarn on the back instead of the shape of a body, like the real shucks were that I observed when I was on the water. Well, a little bit of glue right here on the end of that tail, that's nothing more than Antron yarn, did the job. The other thing that I learned from Dick Rohrbaugh, and had kind of forgotten because it originally got the idea from Gary LaFontaine, and that's sparkle. The sparkle represents or simulates, if you will, the air bubbles that the insect pumps into the ectoskeleton so it can crawl out. And what we have here right now is the shuck, as you call it. Well, that's where this part of the fly right up front here is a part that's crawled out, and we have some bubbles left behind in the exoskeleton there. And that's the thing that I wasn't getting with just plain ordinary yarn. And this has got Antron in it, and in the water, it has little glitteries, as I call them. So it gives you the idea. So now there's the bug. Let's go to some of the inspiration things that I went through. First off, I started with John Karef's website, and he had bugs in the water there. And so I went looking on the internet for a fly that I thought represented what I was looking for, the shuck and the bug crawling out and all that kind of stuff. And this is what I found, okay? And it's from the Fly Fishers group online. Well, I did a little bit of work on it. I took and did some photoshopping on the wing to give you an idea where the lump was at and the shuck and all of that. And I put a black line in there to indicate the water line. And then I looked at the key features that I could see in this drawing. And that's this right here. This is the fly, the shuck, the legs, the head crawling out, the wings sticking up, the legs, etc. And that's how we came to the KX emerger. And I might want to add, I look at emergers and cripples as the same thing. The only difference between an emerger and a cripple is that at one stage of the game, the cripple never managed to get out of the shuck. The other one's still struggling to get out of the shuck. But quite frankly, the fish looking up at a cripple or at an emerger don't see one or the other. They just see dinner. I mean, so it's what that boils down to. Anyhow, back to that. And how are we going to tie this guy? Well, it's so easy. I had to do a lot of talking because if you thought Eric's got done quick, wait, don't blink. That's all I can tell you. It's the kind of fly that guides really like a lot because they don't take a lot of time and they're effective. Wait a minute. Before I do this, though, I've got to do one other thing so I don't have to take this out of the vise. So let me just set this aside for a second. Let me reach over to my materials. Whoops, wrong camera. Over to the materials. And let me get my a piece of this Antron yarn, and I'll just bring it over to the vise. And I want you to notice that what I've got here is I've got an elbow, is what I call it. You get these every time they fold over a piece of cardboard or a part of the packaging process. Now you can straighten that elbow out with a stream of warm air from a hairdryer, and it'll just straighten it right out, just slicker a whistle. Or the other thing you can do with that is cut it off, fuzz it up, cut it a couple of times, and mix it in with some hare's ear. And this sparkly little fibers like this, mixed in the hare's ear dubbing, will give you a treat. Now, that's just an extra tip. Don't have a darn thing to do with today. It's just something to do with that fuzzy stuff. Mixed in with your hare's ear makes for really some nice highlights in the dubbing. Set that aside. And let me just stick this in the vise for a minute. I'll reach back over here and get my flashlight and my UV, and we'll come back over here. And I'll set that flashlight down, getting it ready to go. And I'm just going to take and twist this like a bunch. Okay, I think you can still see what I'm doing there without my hands getting in the way. I'll just put some UV on there. Set that aside. Set the UV. And I'm just going to cut that in half there. And I've got 2 shucks for a size 12. And if I want a size 20, I take and cut this shuck that I'm pointing at now with my scissors into 3 of these. And of course, the segments will be held together at the end by the little bits of UV glue. So that's one of the things that you can do. Now, I'm going to set this aside for the moment and get that hook back in the vise so that we can go ahead and start tying the fly. Reaching over for my thread. I'll just set these hooks out of the way. I'm going to need that here in a minute. And I'm going to take my hair stacker and move it over to the tying vise along with the thread. And we'll just attach the thread to the hook. Now, one of the things I like to do is notice that I've got an O-ring on my bobbin holder. That keeps the thread from coming out. I cannot tell you how many times I've come and grab a bobbin, especially after I've got on a plane and fly to a show someplace to do a fly tying demonstration. All my bobbins have come undone, and I had to restring them all. Well, I don't know what it is about travel. It does that, but anyhow, that's one way I keep them now. I never have that trouble anymore. A fellow by the name of Leroy Hyatt does a public television fly tying series out of Lewiston, Idaho. And he called me one day about that. He says, "You know, Al, you ought to fix that problem that I saw you at the show having the other day. We had a show in Central Idaho, and he happened to be there. And anyway, he gave me that tip, and I published it in Fly Tire magazine. Oh, Jesus, a lot of years ago. This must have been 20 years ago that we've been using these rubber O-rings. But anyway, I've got just a quick application of thread right at the hook eye. We'll get back over here, and we're going to get some of our deer hair. And I'll just cut it off. And let's get over at the vise again. I want to show you a couple of things about this deer hair. First off, I want you to notice that this hair has got a little bit of a curve in it. Not much, but a little bit. Just enough that it can make it it doesn't stack well, but you can straighten that. Now, I know most of you who've been watching presentations that I do have already seen this, so just yawn a little bit or go get a cup of coffee or whatever while I go through this segment. But what we're going to do is straighten that out so that it'll stack really nice. And you do that by taking your thumbnail and your forefinger and putting a series of crimps, just like our brothers and sisters who tie full dress Atlantic salmon flies do, with their with the crest on their salmon flies. They adjust the how would I say, the length, the span across the hook by putting crimps either on one side or the other so that it will fall in line with the tip of the tail. Anyway, so I've got that pretty well straightened out now, and I need to get rid of the waste that's in here, the short fibers and the I don't know, fur, fud, I just call it junk. Anyway, I'm going to get back out here over my waste bin and to clean that out. I like to keep that cleaned out away from the camera, because the cameras and fuzz, I don't know, I think there's something about them, they just don't get along, and it doesn't make for a good presentation to have a bit of fuzz in the middle of your camera lens. Anyway, I'm just putting those fibers into the hair stacker. And I've got those pretty well stacked up. And I think I've got a few too many, so I'm just going to get rid of some of them. And that looks a little bit better. And I'm going to measure them so they're as long as a complete hook. And just tie them right on top, right at the front, really bailing into it. I'm not trying to be delicate with this in any way at all. Okay. And what I'm doing here is I bind that. This area right here is going to be the head, whatever you want to call it, of the fly, if it's got a head. I'm going to trim this at an angle so that I get a severe angle on the cut. And one of the things, I'm going to show you a little trick. One of the things about covering over trimmed hair like that is you end up with what I call the sticky. Let me get a tight view here. Okay, a sticky are these fibers that end up sticking up as you're trying to wrap, and they get to poking up in the air on you. Now, I want to back off just a little bit here and show you how to never have stickies again. You take your thumbnail and your forefinger and line them up right with the direction that the thread's going to go on the hook, and you use the thumb. I'm kind of exaggerating here, but you use the thumbnail to guide that thread right into the next turn. And if you don't do that, your hand wiggles. I guarantee you, you're a better person than I am if it doesn't wiggle. But if you'll back off and allow those two fingers to guide the thread, you can just wrap that stuff, moving your fingers back as you go. And one of the things, and I got one sticky that showed up, and I'm just going to get rid of that. One of the things that I've learned over the years, a lot of years as a commercial tire, quite frankly, is it's really tough to get a good looking outer body with a lousy underbody. Not impossible, but it's tough. And then when the fly gets wet, it doesn't look real good anyway, because it's all the lumps and valleys and bad stuff show. Now I'm going to set this in so that it'll be sticking out about, I don't know, whatever looks right to me. I'll just tie that on, wrapping back on the hook a ways until it's about where I want it. I got a couple of fibers breaking loose here, and okay, that's fine. Now I got a choice of either re-gluing or just leaving them, and I think I'll just leave them. Trim the waist of that. Looking pretty good. Now we're going to get rid of the last of those. Okay, now I'm going to wrap all the way forward, and let's go back to the materials. And we're gonna just get a piece of peacock. This is a pretty short application, so one strand of peacock will do the job. And I've taken quite a few off of this side over here, so I'll just grab some off of here so that I can kind of eventually get the two sides caught up with each other. Now we'll get back over here, and I'm just going to tie that on the hook by the tip right here at the front. And trim the waist, pull this around, and I'm going to grab the thread and the peacock together and just start wrapping from front to back. And what I'm doing is building peacock chenille, twisting the fibers or the peacock around the thread as I wrap towards the back. Now I want a nice full thorax, whatever you want to call this fly, but I'm not caring too much about the back part. In fact, I want the back part to be really rough. It's the way we used to tie them for the spring creeks when I was guiding those spring creeks out of Livingston. And you notice that the application of the peacock that I've got here behind the thorax area is a lot ruggeder, if that is even a word, than it is right there in the thorax area. So let me trim this off, and I'm just going to rib with my thread over that and stop right there at the back of the thorax area. Fold over the head, wing, whatever you want to call all of this, tie it off. And I'm going to just kind of pull it up a bit because I don't know if you've spent any time on spring creeks, but let's talk about this for a bit. I cannot tell you the hours that I spent on a spring creek. Fly fisher on this side, casting, guide on the other side, over here, over there, you know, this kind of stuff. And one of the things about that kind of a situation is you get to observe what's happening on the water a lot. You're not doing any fishing. You're not having to fiddle with a rod. You're just spotting things for your customer, but you're also learning stuff. And when an insect hatches, I've seen these insects float by me on the spring creeks, go by you, and you'll see the little bit of the shuck sticking out, and you'll see this blob on top of the shuck. A little bit of sparkle in the shuck, probably the air bubbles. I didn't even think about that until that presentation recently by Dick Rohrbaugh, where he was talking about the same thing, but he was in referencing to midges. But anyway, but that's the way they hatch. And in watching all that hatching, that's where we came up with this. Now let me get back to the fly. I get myself waylaid, and sometimes I forget where I'm going, and that's not good. But it's also one of the things that just goes along with age. So now let me get back over to the materials, and I've got some rubber leg material here in this clip. Let's just get over here so you can see it, because getting rubber leg material of this size is not easy. I mean, it's not impossible to get, but this isn't your standard rubber leg size rubber legs. So let me just get ready to tie this on. And you notice that back here, right there, the rubber legs are pretty close together as far as length. I cannot tell you how many times I have watched people tie their rubber legs on. They'll tie one on this side, cinch it down, and they'll tie one on the other side and cinch it down, and then spend some time trimming them because they didn't come out even when they're already even. Just stick them through the thread. Decide how long you want them back there. And then you take one and pull it back over to the other side. And the other one back over to the near side. Whoops, that got away from me. Well, that wasn't what was planned, folks, but that's what happens sometimes during a live demonstration. Anyway, that putting them on one side and moving them over, I learned from a young fly tyer at a show in Logan, Utah. He was a high school student who spent his summers tying for this shop and doing some guiding. And He's the one that showed me how to do that. He didn't even know it. He was just tying flies next to me at a show. I watched and I learned. Anyway, I want you to notice that when I trimmed on this fly, what I did is I wanted to make sure that the legs in the back, well, that leg's too long. I kind of screwed up when I lost that leg because this is a leg that was just the perfect length. I want the legs back here a little bit longer than the legs up front. And why is that? Well, if you look how those bugs set on the water, they've got the legs that kind of set back to stabilize the bug that seem to be shorter, even though they're back here closer to the body. And then there's the ones out front that provide the stabilization in the front of the fly. Anyway, so let me tie this off. All right, set that down, trim off the waist. And there we've got the KX emerger. Now, what is the KX emerger? Well, the K comes from my buddy John Kreft, whose photography gave me the inspiration on actually changing this pattern. And it was that he and Richard Rohrbaugh from Oregon there that gave the inspiration for getting the bubbles in the shuck. And the X, the original pattern didn't have the rubber legs on them. It was only when I recently found this really fine rubber leg material that I started tying them with rubber legs on them. And that's the one thing that I don't know if it'll make any difference or not. But I want you to notice that that rubber leg material still looks pretty cool, even on a size 18. I don't know. I think it'll stabilize the fly. And if not, I'm kidding myself, and then that's fine too. And questions. Let's see. Somebody has written in there, your thoughts of gold versus brown shuck. Yeah, I have no feelings about it. Most of the stuff I thought I saw in the spring creeks, and I'm referencing mostly the spring creeks around Livingston as well as the backwaters of the Missouri and the Madison. That I saw, they were kind of a brownish color. And let's see, John Wright says, can you use stretchy thread for the legs? I don't know, if stretchy thread holds together, I don't know why not. But most of the stretchy thread that I've seen kind of fuzzes apart, so I don't know. And any comments, concerns, whatever's?
Neil had a question about wanting to know what you use to stick the legs together, I think. Is that right, Neil?
Yes, sir.
I don't, what do I use to stick the legs together? I don't understand.
It looked like you had the legs adhered to one another as you put them on.
Oh, they had been in this clip right next to each other. So no, they weren't stuck together. It just may have looked that way. I held them together as I slipped them up around, and I lost one. And yeah,
Got it. I thought you had something holding them together.
I sure didn't. You're very observant, but it wasn't what was happening at all.
Very nice looking fly. I like that.
Lou Duncan has promised to test this fly for me because I showed this to Lou a while back in another presentation. And so I'm expecting a report as the spring unfolds. And I hope to get to the Henry's Fork for opening of the Railroad Ranch in mid-June and try this fly. But I wanted to comment, Eric talked about the Railroad Ranch, and I don't know if some of you other guys that have fished the ranch have ever noticed this phenomenon, but it has proven terribly effective for me. Okay, so you're sitting on the Henry's Fork, the water's gliding by, and there's a little bubble comes up to the surface, and then it spreads out as it floats downstream. And then you wait a while, and pretty soon a little bubble comes up, and it's about so big around, and then it just spreads out as it goes down the water. Wow. Well, I just sat there false casting, waiting for a bubble to show up, and as soon as that bubble shows up and it's within my casting range, I'll just land my fly right in the middle of that. And I've got about a 6 to 8 foot drift. Perfect. Because the edge of that ring grabs my leader and takes that fly along, and I get incredible dead drifts. And I don't know what causes those bubbles. I've only seen it on the Henry's Fork, but I want to tell you what, it is a killer. And one of my favorite flies on the Henry's Fork, I hate to tell you this, it's going to make you all mad because you're trying to imitate stuff. I do better with a number 20 Royal Wolf than anything. So tuckle away all you want. I have the Spring Creek. I was guiding a customer from Pennsylvania, and I won't say any more other than I was guiding him on Armstrongs that particular day, and he was having pretty good luck. And he said, "Would you like to fish a bit?" And I said, "Well, yeah, I can fish a bit." And he said, "Well, what are you going to use?" I said, "Well, I usually fish this Spring Creek with a couple of these emergers, or I always have really good luck with a small Royal Wolf. I'll start with an 18. If the fish come up and look at it and then turn away, what you do is you want to go to a smaller size." And so I put on an 18. And a couple of fish came up and looked at it. So I said, "Oh." So I went down and I put on a size 22 Royal Wolf. Had phenomenal. That guy walked away, and I got a big order of Royal Wolves from him, or let me rephrase, I got a large order of small Royal Wolves from him, and ended up sending him there in Pennsylvania. But anyway, do not discount a good presentation and show the fish something just slightly different than they're used to seeing. And they ain't seen Royal Wolves on the Spring Creeks. I'll tell you that right now. It's just
this story is great, and I had a similar story myself.
I'm going to spotlight you so we're side by side, Eric. Okay.
It is. I had a similar story on the Missouri side channels. There were nothing but pseudos, and pseudos, you never know what to throw for pseudos. And so I asked at the fly shop. I mean, I was desperate. We had tried various things. And the guy at the fly shop said, throw a number 20 or 22 Parachute Adams. And I'm thinking, all right, Parachute Adams. Lo and behold, that night, banged a fabulous trout with a 22 Parachute Adams. So, you think a lot of these flies they've seen one too many times, or Brand Betters, of course, was in the North Country, was a huge believer. And the last time I saw him in his shop, he was tying number 20 parachute Royal Wolf, not parachute, Royal Wolves, number 20, just like Al's talking about, for the Sable, for the West Branch of the Sable.
Another story going in the exact opposite direction is I was guiding another a couple of fellows in Yellowstone Park on Slough Creek, and we'd come into this one section of Slough Creek below the meadow, and the fish in there were just steadily coming up and sipping and coming up and sipping, and you could see that they were feeding on some pretty small mayflies, and so they started offering these long tippets and little bitty mayflies, and the fish would come up and look at them, and the fish would look up there at that and say, "Hey, George, that don't look like it's got the right number of turns of hackle on it," and then sink back to the bottom. I'm joking about the turns of hackle. You understand, though, that fish looked it over real good and just sink right down. And this went on for like 2 hours. Well, what these guys didn't know is that the first part of the day, when the wife delivered the son and the father, they said, I want you to understand, guide. She knew my name. I don't remember her name, but she said, "I want you to understand, we have a dinner at 7:00 and they have to be back for that." Okay. So here we are. This is going to be 4:00 in the afternoon, and they haven't hardly touched the fish. Fish coming up and looking, sinking down, coming up and looking, sinking down. So finally I said to the guy, I said, "Would you like to catch a couple of fish before we leave?" "Oh, yeah. I said, "Well, cut that long tippet off." And I pulled out a number 4 black zonker, swung it through there, and on the first swing through, he just nailed a fish. And so I got to him and the kid both in the black zonkers. So what I'm trying to say is sometimes all you got to do is show the fish something different that you're used to seeing. You know, I just, but one of the many things that one of your friends on here tonight or this afternoon, Eric, is a guide that you've guided with. And I'm sure that he could probably chime in with a story or two himself.
I'm sure Charlie's got plenty of stories. I know Charlie.
Mr. Allen, when you have a moment, would it be okay if I ask a question about your the fly you just tied?
Yeah, you betcha.
Obviously, with the computer issues I had, I missed the first portion of it, and I see the shuck or body of the fly looks to be either poly or antron, and I'm not sure which it is. Do you typically fish this fly as a single style emerger or midge pattern, or do you usually use a dropper off the back of this and fish it in tandem with something else? How do you prefer to fish the pattern?
Long tippet, spring creeks, one fly. I've never had a lot of success trying to do a double fly rig up on the spring creeks. I mean, when you're talking a spring creek, you're talking about water that just barely flows. The fish have plenty of time to see it. I just not had much success. I mean, it's the Yellowstone and the spring creeks adjacent to the Yellowstone. It's not uncommon for when I was guiding people to pull up on the bank, have lunch, and just over the bank was the spring creeks, and on this side was the Yellowstone. I mean, if you were fishing in the Yellowstone, it was large caddis with a bead-headed dropper underneath, and you climb right up over the bank, and you're in the spring creeks. And boy, if you weren't size 20 and smaller on a long tippet, you just weren't fishing.
So you weren't particularly
Charlie
prospecting with this. This is something that you would more precision casting. So you're watching for rising fish and targeting specific fish.
Exactly.
Okay. Yes, sir.
Charlie's got his hand raised. Thank you, Charlie. That way I could find you. I'm going to add you as a spotlight if that's okay with you, and you can then unmute yourself and chat a little bit about your experiences as a guide, because
Charlie, tell them
we'd love to hear from you.
Tell them how you managed to get me into fish somehow.
You know, I think it was luck more than anything, because but the story was great with Rick. You had just come out. My God, Rick, it's been 26 years. It's been 26 years, hasn't it?
Yeah.
So we got into, we were fishing the gunpowder. I think it was kind of mid-March. Was it, Rick? It was mid-March, and Bruce Copeland and I.
It was early. Yeah.
It was early, and I believe we started to get these little, I think it was Hendrickson's. I just can't remember what was coming up, these little things. And we started just sweeping wet flies because nothing was really biting. And Rick says I was guiding him. I was just really right next to him saying, okay, let's try this. Let's try this. Not much there, but we were swinging wet flies. And for what it's worth, I've always thought wet flies are not given the attention they deserve, in terms of, seems to be more of an old school thing, but wet flies just can be so deadly. I would imagine you all have your experiences with it, but this is more emotional, but I can't believe we're seeing each other after 26 years, and it's great to see everybody. And Al, I had a question on that. What was the reason on this last fly that you tied? What was the reason that you tied the portion behind the thorax, the peacock herl, you wrapped it in with the thread? Is there a specific reason for that, or just to strengthen it or make it more?
It strengthens it, and it also, the way you do that, you can either build it full, or you can really cinch down on it and make it rugged. And it was very rugged at the back half and full in the thorax half.
Yeah.
And it's just and you probably have tried quite a bit. You know that when you really cinch down on it, you're really taking a lot of twists into that. And when you're loose, you're letting the twist slip a little bit.
So hopefully Rick will join us, but we're going to the Henry's Fork in July, and I had never, ever heard of anybody pulling out a royal wolf on the Henry's Fork. I think that's fascinating,
Well,
and I'm definitely going to do it.
Be sure, and another thing, my theory as an example, the parachute Adams, still an incredible fly here in the West, probably in the East too, though I've never fished it in the East. But in last years, maybe the last 10 years, a fly called the purple haze, which is nothing more than a purple-bodied Adams, is a fly that is at least have some mention, if not a pretty darn good pattern to have in your fly box. And I say again, it's the same thing. Show the fish something they want to see, but slightly different. And if nothing else, I don't know whether it's curiosity or not being gun shy at that new color or the different design or what. I don't know what it is, but
By the way, I have a comment on the Henry's Fork. Early, last time I fished the Henry's Fork, I wasn't breathing well and I had a lot of physical problems. I still do, but anyhow, early in the day, I had seen a fish rise, and I had covered it with some PMDs, and no, it didn't take. And later that day, my friend Tom Wilson said to me, "Hey, I just saw a green drake." So I thought, well, I'm going to put a green drake on and put it over where I saw that fish rise earlier today. And lo and behold, got a big boy to the point that he got off. I did not land that fish, and slammed it the first drift over him. So I had always understood that you could not blind fish at Henry's Fork. Well, you can if you've seen a rise earlier in the day, and then if something comes off that they really want to see, like they love the green drakes and the brown drakes, try that.
I've got
Yeah,
a great
sure.
story. If Eric, can you hear me?
Yeah, love to hear.
I think
Is that Dick speaking?
Yeah, Dick Shaw.
Okay, let me get you up here, Dick.
Pardon me?
Okay, let's see. Add spotlight. There we go.
There you go. A couple of years ago, up on the El Saba in Michigan, I fished the last chance cripple. I had just learned to tie it, and thought it was a beautiful fly. It might be fun to fish. And it was a really slow day. The fish weren't where they typically are in the cover along either bank. So I put one right down the middle of the stream, a long cast, and much to my surprise and delight, a swallow came down and picked it up. In all of the years of dry fly fishing, I'd never, ever had a bird come down and take my fly. And it was such a compliment that had to be a hell of a good tie.
Did he give you a good tug?
Well, he got up about 2 feet off the water and decided something was wrong and dropped it. So
I caught a bat one evening fishing a lake on a bat cast, and I gave it a couple of tugs. And it was flying around up there, and it came off. But I mean, that was kind of a stunner.
well, it's still a great fly, and I like Eric's pattern. I have not seen that before, and as sparse as that is, delicate, it looks like a good fly.
Well, anyway, what I'm going to do now is the chat section that we always go to. I think we've pretty well got this episode out to where we can just kind of now include everyone into the presentation. So I am going to let's see, what am I doing here? Remove spotlight. Remove spotlight. Get everybody back so that we're all we all can talk, and now we're just a group of people talking, and anybody that wants to chime in surely can. I see Sherry joined us. Hey, Sherry, welcome.
Hi, Sherry.
You're muted, Sherry. Anyway, I got an email from Sherry today. She disassembled her Zoom studio to go to a show. And so I get this email back from Sherry. She says, "Help, how do I put this thing back together?" Well, in the time it took me to answer the email, I get another one from her. It says, "Oh, I figured it out. I figured it out." So anyway, it's always good to have a friend in the background you can turn to for help. Both
Yeah, I'm
ways.
teaching tomorrow night, and I just I'll just put it back together, and I usually don't teach the guild classes. I have all these other instructors, and I go, oh, I'm going to teach this one, and then I couldn't get my camera to work, and I go, wait a second, it's called plug it in the
Yeah.
right place.
Oh yeah. Anyway,
Yeah,
Just for my people who don't know Sherry, Sherry's just a wonderful teacher. I've caught a couple of her things, and Sherry, I apologize. I haven't been following your latest series, but I will get there.
yeah, time is precious.
Well,
So thanks
it's
for coming.
nothing but doctor's appointments. It seems like it's crazy.
yeah.
Well, we've only got my class Thursday and then one more class. And then I'm going to wrap it up for the winter series and go fishing for the summer.
God, that sounds like an awful thing to have to live through. She
I
only
know,
lives about,
you know, we
she
got all
only lives
these.
about she lives about 3 steps away from some of the most beautiful water in Oregon. So
Yeah, fishing Metolius.
yeah.
Gentlemen,
folks,
before we get off, I'd like to tell Eric something, if that's okay, and you as well, Mr.
absolutely, you go right ahead.
Eric, I don't recall, or I don't know if you will recall. I sent you an email about 3 or 4 months ago. You had just recently moved. I've known about Al for quite some time. I've got several books that I'd love to bring around and milk his brain on, but I just miraculously, I believe there was a Project Healing Waters event, and somebody had mentioned your name. And I happened to stumble across you on YouTube, and there was about a span during COVID of roughly a year long when you were in the process of your move. I know you had some family issues you were trying to deal with, and I really was concerned enough that I reached out and just wanted to make sure that you were still around and let you know that there were a lot of us that you personally helped develop our skills and skill sets through your through a lot of the videos that you had done. And I know I've said it, you know, some of the other videos that you guys posted to Facebook doing these Zoom meetings, that it's appreciated, and I'm truly excited to see you back. And I try to take as much of this in as I can. This has truly saved my life. When I came back from Iraq and Afghanistan, I wound up with a combat injury that changed my life forever. And I'm a young man to be retired. I would much rather be working and, you know, doing the best for my family that I could. But I look at this as a second shot, a second chance given to me by God. Time is incredibly short. And so I have used this as my fly tying and fly fishing when I'm able has become my therapy. And it's gentlemen like you that pass on these lessons that have sped up the learning process and really shortened the learning curve for guys like me. And it means a lot. It is truly something that I look forward to. And I just wanted to thank you guys for what you do. Each one of these Zoom meetings that I can jump on or that somebody's able to see, it may be more than just a lesson. It may be motivation to keep hoping for the next day. And so I'm very grateful and gracious for both of you taking your time, the resources, the money you've spent to do this for us. And I'm sure many of us feel the same way.
Well, Mike,
Thank you.
I think Al and I are both honored by your comments. Thank you very much.
That was really good. Really
Yeah.
good. I love it.
Each one of you that teach, you know, one of us guys, more than grateful. Like I said, I stepped in and tried to fill in as a lead for the Knoxville, East Tennessee Project Healing Waters for some time before I moved to the Driftless region. And I absolutely am infatuated with it. An obsession is probably not even a good enough word with the art of fly tying and fly fishing. And I'm not sure which I like the most at this point, but I'm grateful to folks that have the knowledge to pass that on to the new ones getting into the sport. So thank you, each and every one of you.
Well, I think I can speak for Sherry and Al and those of us that do this stuff. We've all had teachers through the years. We've all watched countless YouTube videos, and we just didn't show up and oh, hey, look, I can tie a fly. It's a lot of years of learning from others, and so it's all part of it. I mean, and now we're in a position where we can give a little bit here.
One of the things that I find interesting is that I had been a commercial fly tyer for over 20 years when I went to my first fly fishing show after moving to Idaho and discovering the Federation of Fly Fishers. And Wayne Llewellyn was the first fly tyer that I saw at a show. And I was just stunned. I mean, because I already had 20 years experience meeting customer needs and cranking out bugs, and thought I was pretty darn good, and then found out that I didn't know a darn thing. But it got me started down a road of learning from people. And when I finally felt that I was at the point that I could share something with people, I started traveling to these shows. Now let's talk about some dollars and cents about this. We do this for the love of it, to share it with all of you. The last show that I went to, it was an in-person show the last year before COVID. Gretchen and I traveled to it. We had someone host us, so we didn't have to pay for a room, and we got almost $3,500 in travel expenses. So you're talking about us getting together, Eric and I, and sharing an afternoon with you, and we have probably between us a couple $1,000s worth of equipment in the Zoom studio.
Absolutely.
But look, we're going to end up meeting and helping people besides you, people on Facebook, people on YouTube. And quite frankly, it don't cost nearly as much as it did when we traveled to an in-person show, and we only got to have maybe 20 or 30 people across the table from us. Now it's across the airwaves with hundreds. So I think it's good for you and it's good for us.
Yeah, that's why I started it in 2020 when I had to cancel the expo in Albany. I said, I can't just leave these guys high and dry. And I said, I'm going to learn how to do this Zoom thing. And Al was my mentor, and we bought equipment, and some of it worked and most of it didn't. And then it started working.
Yeah. One of the things you guys want to do, if you get a chance, is go out looking for a thing called Sherry's Hackle Handle. See what you can find on YouTube. All I can tell you is do it. You'll be glad you did. Leave it at that.
Well, thank you.
Well, you're the
My
one that
class is
came up
tomorrow
with
night.
it.
If you want to know,
I used Sherry's Hackle handle on one of my demos for sure. I think it was you talk about East meets West. I think it was a Carrie Stevens fly. I use that handle to good effect.
Interesting. Yeah.
But anyway, you go out and look for that. You'll find it, or we'll have Sherry at a future date demonstrating Sherry's Hackle handle here on East Meets West. But anyway, if there's not any more comments, I'm getting ready to do the wrap. I need the next few bit of segments for the recording. So let me get that taken care of. Hey everyone, thank you so much for joining us. For now, it's a wrap. Until next time, see ya.